So my last comic book video absolutely blew up. I honestly wasn't expecting the video to gain that much traction. It was just supposed to be a placeholder until I got done working on my next video that I actually wanted to do. But to my surprise, it was a smash hit, literally overnight. I just want to say thank you to everybody who helped make the video a massive success. I got a lot of comments, and while the majority of people were agreeing with me, there were also a couple of comic book fans who disagreed with what I had to say, which is totally fine. I can't expect everybody to have the exact same opinion. Most people were pretty graceful about it, but there were a few who got very angry at me and very defensive. It got so bad, I even had one dude accuse me of being racist, which is just so out of left field and bizarre to me, because as far as I could tell, the only time I ever mentioned race was indirectly when I brought up Miles, and I didn't even say anything bad about him either. While I was reading through the comments, I kept on seeing a lot of the same arguments over and over again. Maybe people just weren't understanding my points. Maybe I just didn't explain myself as well as I should have. So I decided to do a follow-up video and help clarify a few things and hopefully give some people a better understanding of where I'm coming from and further elaborate on some of my points. Also, I will be mentioning specific comments, however, I won't be showing any screenshots out of respect for these people's privacy. If you really care that much, just go to the comment section of my original video. Now, I am not a comic book expert. I never claimed to be. I don't know why people ever thought I did, but I am an avid comic book fan. Most of my favorite comics are either standalone Elseworld stories like The Dark Knight Returns or All-Star Superman, or older comics like Nightfall and Under the Red Hood. I've been reading comics for a very long time. I'm not old enough to have been around during the 80s or the 90s, but I was around for the early 2000s. Every week, my dad would take me to the library to help me with my homework, and as a reward, I would get to take home one comic book. Now, as a kid, I had no concept of what continuity or consistency was. I had always just assumed they were all standalone stories that had no connection to each other. I just liked seeing my favorite superheroes doing superhero things. But then I came across one comic that changed my entire perspective and the way I look at comics. Exiles. Exiles is a pretty obscure comic. I don't think anybody watching this video has ever even heard of it before. Like, nobody talks about this comic, and I genuinely don't know why. It's about a team of obscure superheroes from separate universes that go around on missions and course correcting certain events throughout the multiverse. A lot of the major complaints I had about modern comics that I had mentioned in my video are directly addressed by this comic. This is a comic that actually handles the multiverse concept well. The whole multiverse trend may be popular now, to the point where people are already getting sick of it.
We're watching the new Justice Friends anime. This is the one where they explore the multiverse.
I see another version of myself.
Just what the world needs. More forgotten characters dragged back from the grave just so some dirtbag animator can buy a third yacht.
Yeah, I ain't got another multiverse in me.
But I already got a head start on it than most people today, all thanks to Exiles. If I had to compare it to anything, I would say it's actually pretty similar to One Piece. I mean that in the sense that they follow a very similar formula. There are story arcs and it has a linear storyline, but it's also episodic enough that you're never lost or confused at any point. In One Piece, they're going from island to island, whereas in Exiles, they're going from universe to universe. So it's sort of like they're helping out the locals, only on a very larger scale. It also had that sort of Survivor aspect to it, where none of the characters were permanent members. They were either promised to be sent home after successfully completing enough missions, or they died during battle. It felt like a series of levels to be beaten, almost like a video game, rather than a playground where nothing matters like most multiverse stories. The rotating cast of unique and diverse characters helped keep things fresh and prevented the story from being repetitive. So Marvel meets One Piece meets Survivor. I ate this shit up as a kid. I couldn't get enough of it. My favorite character, by far, was Mimic. He had one of the most useful superpowers that on paper should have been fucking broken, but it was handled in a way that felt balanced. He basically had the ability to copy other heroes' powers, but he could only copy 5 powers at a time. So if he wants to copy a new power, he has to give up one of his 5. So he has to be very selective and smart about it. He's also able to mix and match certain abilities together. Meanwhile, others aren't compatible with each other. So there's a few different layers of strategy going on. He's basically an ever-changing Swiss Army knife. He was also just a generally cool character. I don't know, something about him just gave off Jason vibes from Power Rangers. I started rereading Exiles just recently, and it still holds up. It's such a massive shame how it doesn't get any recognition. It's actually criminal. If you want to start getting into comics but have no idea where to start, I would highly recommend Exiles. Trust me, you won't regret it. Read the original from the early 2000s though. Don't read the new one. The new one sucks. It's literally just an advertisement for the new characters.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Savage Dragon is another awesome comic I read from when I was a kid. My uncle owned a comic book collection and he would occasionally let me borrow a few issues. I got to read all kinds of different stuff, but out of everything I read, this one stuck out to me. I always thought it was kind of hilarious how we have this dude who's very clearly not human, and yet nobody ever seems to acknowledge it or pay any mind to it. He's kind of like the Thing from Marvel in the sense that everybody's just super friendly towards him. People just sort of accept him for who and what he is. They're all super chill about it and act like it's totally normal.
Radcliffe, you're pulling duty with the animated cat.
Hiya, Toots.
Look out there, this is a cartoon cat.
He's supposed to be back on duty. He was only suspended for a month.
Listen to what I'm saying. An animated cat just walked into the squad room. Hello?
He'll do it again tomorrow, so what's your point?
He's basically an alien who's lost his memory, so he goes on a journey to uncover his past. The mystery aspect of it, mixed with your sort of slice of life of your average, everyday cop, is just so engaging and cool. One minute he'll be finding clues to his past, the next he'll get into this big fight, maybe he'll have a nice, sentimental moment with his girlfriend, or he'll be dealing with trivial, stupid bullshit at the office because some idiot screwed up the paperwork. He's not really a superhero, he's basically just a regular guy who just happens to be super strong. People flock to him not because he's an alien, but because he's a genuine hero. So many other superheroes have this greater sense of grandeur about them. Meanwhile, Dragon is just a regular cop. And I always thought there was just something so cool about that. I don't have a problem with heroes like Superman being aspirational, but it's gotten to this really weird point where he's become this sort of meta commentary that only power scalers care about, and it's honestly really fucking lame. Dragon feels more like a local hero, and he feels way more relatable because of that. He's basically John McClane from Die Hard if he were a comic book character.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
The dude is literally an alien, and yet he's one of the most human characters you'll ever see. I don't know. Maybe it's because my dad was a cop, and I was able to connect with the character on that level. Also, I just recently found out that it's apparently the longest running comic with a single creator in history. It also addresses an issue that I didn't mention in my original video that I will bring up in a bit. Go read Savage Dragon, it's awesome. I went through some of the comments of my last video, and I saw one person bring up Spawn, which genuinely made me slap my own forehead. I'm so mad at myself for not mentioning Spawn in that video. Spawn is another great example that addresses a lot of my issues that I had mentioned in that video. There are several different versions, but it's all self-contained and helmed by Todd McFarlane. McFarlane has total and complete authorial control, almost like Akira Toriyama with Dragon Ball. It's not like Marvel and DC, where writers are basically just renting the characters, and it's a collaborative effort that just becomes a jumbled mess of contradictions. Todd McFarlane owns the character. What he says goes. He handles it in a way that actually feels consistent. Can't recommend Spawn enough. Please go read it if you haven't already. By the way, Spawn is better than Black Panther, don't at me. Hellboy is another great one. Definitely check out Hellboy if you haven't already. I know most of you have at least seen the movies. Go read the comic, it's great. I watched this video essay on YouTube comparing it to Berserk, and it encouraged me to pick it back up again. So if you're a fan of Berserk, or even Claymore, definitely give Hellboy a chance, it's well worth it. Of course, I'm sure everybody here has at least heard of Invincible. I don't think I really need to explain this one. I was one of the OGs back in the early 2000s. I love the show, but the comic will always be my go-to. It just reeks of that 2003 smell we just don't get anymore. These are the comics I read as a kid. I'm not coming at this from a place of malice, like some people think I am. I'm just making observations. But even more than that, I want more comics like the ones I grew up with. I want more comics like Exiles. I want more comics like Savage Dragon. I want more comics like Spawn. I want more comics like Hellboy. I want more comics like Invincible. I don't want any more comics like the Harley Quinn fart fetish comic or the pregnant Joker comic. People seemed very hung up on my continuity point, and while that was a big point in my video, I think a lot of people were missing the bigger picture. I had one person in my comments say something along the lines of, "This sounds like the same complaints people make about One Piece," but that's not at all the same thing. It isn't just about the length or the chronological reading order. It's about breaking established rules and pushing the boundaries for how much you're willing to suspend your disbelief. Post-Crisis Superman has 2, potentially 3, different origin stories. The original one being written by John Byrne. John Byrne cared very deeply about Superman standing for American values and patriotism. So he wrote it as to where Superman technically wasn't actually born yet until after he had landed, which would make him an American citizen.
Archie! Show them how American you are!
Is it silly? Yeah, sure. But it's established lore and it should be respected. But Superman Birthright totally contradicts this and completely retcons it to be closer to the original Golden Age origin story, which was intended to be an allegory for immigration. This doesn't make any fucking sense. And I know there are going to be people in the comments section saying it was Superboy's retcon punch in Infinite Crisis. No, it wasn't, because Birthright predates Infinite Crisis. If anything, Birthright was the origin story that was affected by the retcon punch, because his origin was rewritten again in Secret Origin. Do you see the problem here? People kept on telling me that you don't need to read multiple comics like it's a homework assignment, but that's just blatantly not true.
If you want to read DC versus Vampires, I don't have a copy here to use as a prop, okay? I like props. It keeps my ADD busy. Anyway, if you want to read DC versus Vampires, you need to go read issues 1 through 6 of DC versus Vampires. In that, Superman seemingly falls to the vampires. We then need to break away. We have to go read Hunters, because DC versus Vampires, Hunters, not a mainline issue, but that explains why Damian is a vampire, but not a vampire at the exact same time. We then have to read Killers, because Killers explains to you why Harley Quinn's blood is bad for the vampires. That's important, because that's literally a plot point used to resolve the comic series. Then, we're not done. Then you gotta read DC versus Vampires All Out War. They resolve the Superman portion in All Out War. Then, you go back to DC versus Vampires 7 through 12. If you didn't read all those spin-offs I told you about, which they don't make easy to find, because right now we get them on digital or you go to your local store, and if neither of those help you, you're clueless, then you don't know why Damian is a vampire helping, why Harley Quinn is used as the way to solve the whole situation, and you're left wondering where the hell Superman went, because they don't even talk about him. He's just gone in the mainline book. But before you Marvel fans want to jump on and be like, well, that's just DC, let's look at the Sins of Sinister, shall we? Sins of Sinister's reading order includes Immortal X-Men 9 and 10, Sins of Sinister 1, Storm 1, Nightcrawlers 1, Immoral X-Men 1, Storm 2, Nightcrawlers 2, Immoral X-Men 2. Then issue 3 of all of those. Then it goes Sins of Sinister Dominion. And if you Google those titles, they will not say Sins of Sinister. If you look up Nightcrawlers, it's called Nightcrawlers. If you get an issue, it's got a nice banner across the top, but that doesn't make it easy to find if you're searching on the internet or at your local store. That's why I'm giving comic books a 4. In order to be in the comic book community and know what you're reading, you almost need a degree on how to research what you need to be reading, okay?
Not only does it require you to read Infinite Crisis, which the average person wouldn't even know to do, but even with that additional reading, it still doesn't make any sense in universe.
Isn't that right, Janet?
You bet, Marty.
Janet? Marty? How are you people?
And that's ignoring the fact that the timelines don't match up and the characters seemingly never age. Now, of course, we know the out-of-universe explanation. The writers need to keep updating and revamping these characters to keep them relevant to the time of publication. But the in-universe explanation? Well, we'll get to that in a bit, trust me. But let's just say, purely for argument's sake, it was all because of Superboy's retcon punch. Doesn't this meta-commentary ultimately prove the point that DC's continuity is inconsistent and unreliable? I can buy into smaller things, like Jason Todd's revival. That's fine. But characters having multiple different origin stories that are all somehow simultaneously canon to each other, even though they all directly contradict each other, that's a bit much for me.
Morning, Dwight. Who are you?
Who am I? I'm Jim. We've been working together for 12 years.
You're not Jim. Jim's not Asian.
You seriously never noticed? Hey, hats off to you for not seeing race.
Please enter your password. You have one new message.
How did you? No. That is sensitive information only for employees, not outsiders.
Dwight, cut it out. I'm trying to work.
You don't work here. You're not Jim.
The Born on Earth and Born on Krypton origins don't just conflict with each other logistically, they conflict with each other thematically as well. Both origins very clearly have drastically different authors' intent and send a different message to the reader about Superman's character. So which one is the right one? Is Superman a red-blooded American born and raised on Earth? Or is he an immigrant from another world seeking refuge? Is it an immigration allegory, or is it about American exceptionalism? They can't both be right. There is no narrative coherence here. It's not just a timeline error, it's a fundamental miscommunication of who the character is. It's also a pretty big middle finger to the people who enjoy John Byrne's run. Why should they invest themselves in a story where their favorite plot points can be erased and deemed as non-canon at any given point? Now let's take a look at Marvel. Now keep in mind, Marvel hasn't rebooted their universe like DC has. It's all supposed to be one big linear timeline. This already presents a few problems similar to the ones I had already mentioned, but there's a very specific example I want to talk about. Let's take a look at The Thing from the Fantastic Four. Ben's a great character. I love Ben. This picture would lead you to believe that Ben's insides are made out of rock as well as his skin. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. Well, apparently not, because here we see only his skin is made out of rock and his insides are made up of regular flesh. These totally contradict each other. There is no legitimate in-universe explanation for this. It really is just the whim of the writers. The writers don't have any restrictions or restraints, and because of that, the story and world building suffer. There is no real consistency, which was one of the problems I was trying to articulate in my previous video. But people got hung up on the multiverse aspect of the video, so that's probably my fault. I will bring up the multiverse later though, because there is something about it that I do want to talk about. But let's take a look at DC's cosmology and power scaling as another example. We're told by Mr. Mixie that the highest dimension in existence is the 6th dimension. And before anybody says he's talking about realms and not spatial dimensions, he's literally talking about spatial dimensions in this same panel and describing his own world as such. Why would he be wrong about his own dimension? So the 6th dimension is the highest dimension. Okay, seems pretty simple. So what seems to be the problem? Well, it turns out Mixie is actually wrong about the 6th dimension being the highest form of existence, because the DC universe follows M theory, which is a part of string theory, which is 11-dimensional in nature. And seeing that Superman defeated Darkseid in Final Crisis using a machine that manipulates the strings of the universe, that does seem to check out. But this directly contradicts what Mixie tells us. And it's not like what Mixie said got retconned in a later comic. These both can't be true. So this is just a plot hole. But whatever. Let's just say Mixie forgot to take his meds. So the DC cosmology is 11-dimensional, right? Well, not really, because there are multiple dimensions beyond the base DC multiverse. We have the time stream, making it 12th dimensional, and beyond that would be the Speed Force wall, which would be 13th dimensional, and then the God Sphere. Now, the God Sphere is a little tricky since it contains the Phantom Zone, which is described as a dimensionless space. Now, if we were to take this at face value, then it would fall under the category of 0-dimensional, meaning it wouldn't scale anywhere. Now, we could potentially scale it to 14D, seeing that it does technically transcend the Speed Force. However, this is highly debatable considering the nature of the Phantom Zone. So for now, we'll just stick to the God Sphere being 14D. Then beyond the God Sphere, we have Limbo, which is a place where forgotten characters reside. The Monitor Sphere transcending that. Then we have Aleph, and then finally the Source Wall. So with all of that in mind, the Source Wall should be 18th dimensional to possibly 19th dimensional. Okay, so that's it then, right? Well, probably not, because within the Bleed is the Orrery of Worlds, which contains a room that is pan-dimensional, or in other words, contains all dimensions. Are these spatial dimensions, which would make all the realms I had just mentioned several layers into Outerversal, which is what comic book fans usually run with? Or are these simply just alternate universes? The comics don't make it very clear, so fans took to Twitter to ask the writers, and guess what? They all gave different answers. This is what I'm talking about when I say there are too many writers who all have their own interpretations and all directly contradict each other. I don't think it really matters either way, seeing that Darkseid is from the God Sphere, which transcends the base multiverse. So what's the problem here? The problem is that he was defeated by Superman in Final Crisis using a machine that manipulated the strings of the universe. If Darkseid really were this 14th dimensional to outerversal being, then why would he be defeated by a machine that manipulates string theory, which is something he should transcend? We also see Superman is able to resist the Source Wall, meaning he should transcend this level as well. But apparently he doesn't, since he needs to resort to an 11th dimensional machine. He's also still weaker than Mixie, who self-admittedly has 5th dimensional attack potency, even though he shouldn't be, because the Source Wall transcends Mixie's dimension. Nothing about this makes any fucking sense. I think there's a pretty big difference between manga fans and comic fans. That being, manga fans seem to care more about consistency and are more likely to hold continuity to a certain level of scrutiny, while comic book fans are more passive and more willing to suspend their disbelief. Let's take a look at Jujutsu Kaisen. By the way, spoilers for the manga if you aren't caught up. So at the end of the fight between Sukuna and Gojo, we find out that Sukuna used a binding vow to create a technique specifically designed to negate Gojo's infinity. This sparked a lot of debate between JJK fans because many people saw this as world-breaking. Whether or not it actually was isn't really the point here. The point is that this is a detail that fans noticed and they were very vocal about it. Take this and compare it to the images I just showed of Ben, and you don't hear a peep from comic fans. Inconsistencies in comics are often dismissed rather than interrogated. They're more willing to sweep it under the rug and brush it off as, it just depends on the writer, which is just baffling to me. If I noticed a plot hole or an inconsistency in Exiles, I'd be ranting and raving about it for hours. Comic fans seem to be more willing to believe certain meta aspects of their respective cosmologies rather than looking at things at face value and scrutinizing the internal logic. Somebody in my comment section had mentioned that the reason why characters in comics don't age is because of something called a floating or a superfluous timeline. I've been following comics and comic channels for a while now, but this is the first time I had ever heard of such a thing. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't ever remember anything like this being brought up in Under the Red Hood. So I checked to verify, and it turns out it's actually true. This just might be the stupidest thing I have ever heard in my entire life, and how anybody can be willing to accept this as absolute fact and overlook the flawed logic in this genuinely blows my mind. Marriages, children, wars. This totally and completely undermines narrative causality and basically throws any and all consistency out the fucking window. The retcon punch and stagnant timeline might be excuses, but they're bad excuses. They exist to preserve IP longevity, not narrative coherence. The amount of logical leaps you would need to make in order for a stagnant timeline to make sense is mind-boggling. But comic fans seem to have accepted and normalized inconsistencies to the point where they aren't interrogated like you would expect to see from something like Jujutsu Kaisen. If My Hero Academia did something like this, people would call it stupid, and rightfully so. But for whatever reason, comics get a pass. I don't understand how these comic writers can get a free pass to get away with whatever they want without any consequences. I heard somebody say it's all a big game of telephone gone wrong, and I think this perfectly describes the spot mainstream comics are currently in right now. Writers should not be allowed to freestyle if they inherit a character that was created by somebody else. You have to be a real fucking douchebag to think you fundamentally understand Batman better than Bill Finger ever did, or that you could write a better Batman story than he ever could. It's different for something like Dragon Ball and Berserk because the creators died before they could finish their work. The creators of Superman and Batman tried to get the rights back for their respective characters, and DC told them to go fuck themselves. One thing that I regret not mentioning in my last video is that the process of creators getting their manga started is very different than here in the West. In Japan, you have to prove your worth with a successful one-shot before you're allowed to make a series. Whereas here in America, publishers are basically just giving these jobs away, and I think the quality of the product does suffer because of this. Like, how the fuck is it fair for Kishimoto, the creator of Naruto, to work through blood, sweat, and tears just to get his first big break? Meanwhile, Tanishi Coates, who has no prior experience in comics, just has Captain America, one of Marvel's biggest and most important characters, handed over to him practically for free and is allowed to do whatever he wants with the character. Who ever thought it was a good idea to celebrate the 4th of July by having Captain America say that the American dream is bullshit? I'm not even trying to get political here, guys. Please don't misunderstand. This just fundamentally goes against the character and what he stands for. Not only does this show that Marvel just doesn't understand Cap, but it's also extremely fucking disrespectful to Joe Simon and his legacy. This is wrong. Let's talk a little bit about the multiverse real quick. I saw a few people in the comments section bring up how not all versions of the characters throughout the multiverse are exact one-to-one copies of each other. And it's not so much the fact that there are an infinite number of Supermen out there, but it's more so that there are an infinite number of people named Superman. But someone else who had pointed this out in my comments also conceded that Marvel and DC do a pretty terrible job conveying how these alternate versions of the characters we see are so drastically different from each other, because for the most part they generally are the same. Like, how is Marvel Zombies Spider-Man, before he got turned of course, really any different from 616 Spider-Man? Their backstories and personalities are practically the same. You know, aside from the fact that he's a zombie, obviously. If you took Zombie Spider-Man, while he was still human of course, and used him to replace 616 Spider-Man, casual readers wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Even the characters themselves can't tell the difference. Peter's loved ones in the Ultimate Universe thought 616 Peter was their Peter. So if the characters themselves can't tell the difference, how the fuck do you expect readers to? Also, even if we want to act like every universe is dramatically different from each other, a lot of you guys also seem to be forgetting that each universe also has its own set of infinite timelines as well. So my point still stands. Now, I did see somebody bring up that they've never actually used any alternate versions of any characters to replace any dead characters in the main continuity. That kind of thing has only ever happened in the Arrowverse, which may be true, but that still doesn't change the fact that they've opened the door to that possibility. I mean, the fact that we literally see it happen in the Arrowverse should ultimately prove that it's possible to do it within the comics as well. They've shown willingness to normalize the concept elsewhere. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say they could absolutely do the same thing in the comics if they really wanted to. One of the arguments I saw getting thrown around a lot in my comments was the modern mythology argument. This is actually something I've heard before, and I never understood this notion. It's very bizarre to me and exudes almost cult-like behavior.
Pie Jesu Domine, dona eis requiem. Pie Jesu Domine, dona
Like, why would you ever put a comic book on the same level as a Greek tragedy? Do you not see how silly and ridiculous that is? These are intellectual properties. Like, let's calm down, guys. These companies clearly don't feel the same way, seeing that Marvel has sold off various characters over the years. So why should I? They care far more about making a profit than respecting the legacy of creators like Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby. For fuck's sake, after Stan Lee died, they used his Twitter account to promote their shitty NFTs. They have no respect for the sanctity of a real-life person, let alone a fictional character.
Okay, they're talking about fictional characters. Fictional characters. Am I getting through to you at all?
I'm not saying you can't get emotionally attached or invested in a character, but holding them on that high of a pedestal just seems very unhealthy. If anything, it's rewarding writers for doing a bad job and letting them get away with whatever the fuck they want. It doesn't excuse structural flaws no matter how hard you try to make it. Stop using this as a shield from scrutiny and standards that we apply to literally everything else. But even if you want to use this weak excuse, you guys do realize that real life myths had endings, right? Like the Odyssey and the Iliad had endings. You guys do know that, right? Epic is my all-time favorite musical. I fucking cry every time I watch it. I'm genuinely brought to tears by how beautiful the ending is. I fucking bawl every time I hear "Would You Fall in Love with Me Again?" I have to fight back the urge to cry just thinking about it. I don't want Epic 2, Amazing Epic, Ultimate Epic, Super Epic, Superior Epic, Magnifico Epic, Epic 2000, Epic Reborn, or whatever other stupid fucking bullshit. Why would you ever want to soil such a perfect ending? I want emotional payoff, not infinite content. I would rather play a good game like Shadow of the Colossus over garbage like Fortnite. Myths evolved over centuries of an entire culture. Comics change because of a new editor-in-chief or because a new movie is coming out. That's not mythology. That's brand management. I saw somebody in my comments section mention this quote about how social media is the shittiest book ever because it never seems to end, and I feel like that's the same attitude a lot of people have towards modern comics. It used to be fun, but now it's just the same thing over and over and over again. The first few Crisis events were great. Infinite Crisis is still one of my all-time favorite comics, but it's become way too formulaic and boring. I was bored while I was reading Death Metal. I didn't even finish it because I already knew how it was gonna end. How many times is the multiverse gonna be in danger? How many times are we gonna see the heroes fighting a universe-ending god? How many times are we gonna see the same story with the same climax? And I think this is the biggest problem a lot of people have with the industry. They keep repackaging the same thing with a new coat of paint and act like it's different when it's not. It's all just to push the status quo. Just take a look at the MCU. The MCU was massive. Most of the movies were good, it had mass appeal, but over time it started to follow the same trend as the comics. Endgame planted those seeds, and it's never been the same ever since. Fantastic Four had a mediocre opening weekend, followed by a staggering 66% drop afterwards. People have gotten fatigued. They're tired of the MCU now. Nobody cares that Chris Evans is coming back as Captain America in Avengers Doomsday. If anything, that's only given people even more reason to avoid the movie because it undermines the events of Endgame and the finality of that film. People aren't going to the theater to watch the MCU anymore. They're going to see Avatar instead. And I'm not saying that like it's a good thing. I fucking hate those movies.
Oh, god damn it! Son of a bitch, idea-stealing assholes! You sons of bitches! Dances with Smurfs was my idea! My idea!
I also saw a handful of people point out how comics are basically like soap operas.
Hey, honey. I brought us some tangerines. This guy was selling them on the off-ramp over by the 2. Devin? What are you doing here?
But the weird part about this claim was that unlike the mythos argument, it was being used by both people defending comics and criticizing comics, which is a bit bizarre to me, and it just shows how divided and disconnected the community has become. I also think it's pretty weird how you would use this as a defense, as if soap operas aren't just background TV or white noise. Like, aren't you basically just admitting comics are low quality?
Keep your attention. You're gonna die. Oh, no, 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 no! Nobody! No!
Regardless, I think this is a pretty accurate way to describe the current state of comics. They're very stagnant and have little to no meaningful development. Any losses or victories are short-lived and ultimately don't have any real consequences. There is no real progress, just the same thing over and over again. The only difference is that you can at least watch a soap opera on TV for free. Meanwhile, you gotta fucking pay to read comic books. And comics aren't cheap. Is it really worth that much of your hard-earned money? Wouldn't you rather spend it on something else that you're more likely to get more value out of? While I was talking to some of the people in the comments, somebody had brought up how it isn't fair to compare comics, a form of media that requires reading, to something like TV shows and movies, media that require watching. I'm not gonna pretend there aren't differences in media. Obviously there are, but I think what most people care about isn't the media itself, but whether or not it's actually good. But if you really want to play this game of you shouldn't be allowed to compare reading to watching, then okay, sure. Why does nobody ever ask, where should I start reading Lord of the Rings? Why does nobody ever ask, where should I start reading Dune? Why does nobody ever ask, where should I start reading A Song of Ice and Fire? See what I mean? I brought this up briefly in my last video, but I just showed a visual and didn't really elaborate on it much. So hopefully I can expand upon it a little bit here. When you are selling a product, there are two major things you need to take into consideration: customer effort score and buyer gratification. If you go to the manga section at your local Barnes & Noble, even if you don't know the actual series on the shelves, you immediately know what everything is. It's organized, clean, neat, concise, simple, and easy to follow. You want to read Dragon Ball? It's right there. Just pick it up and go. You want to read Naruto? It's right there. Just pick it up and go. You want to read My Hero Academia? It's right there. Just pick it up and go. Meanwhile, in the comic book section, it feels like you're in fucking Mad Max. It can be intimidating and overwhelming for newcomers who don't know where to start. Yeah, there's a chance they might pick up a standalone comic like Batman the Imposter, but there's also the chance they might pick up something like Final Crisis or Doomsday Clock. But let's say they do pick up Batman the Imposter. Now here's a genuine question, and I want you to be honest. If that person who's never read a comic book before and doesn't know any better, said that was Batman's true origin story, how would you react? More on that later. But the point I'm trying to make here is that as a beginner, without the assistance of the wiki, which most people don't have the time or patience for, you're basically gambling when it comes to comics. Whereas with manga, there's less risk and higher reward, and because of that, people are more likely to gravitate towards that. Like I said, it's all about customer effort score and buyer gratification. That's one of the reasons why I was able to get into Exiles as easily as I was, and I wish American publishers would do that more often.
What you'll notice is there's many different series, but you'll notice very similar sizing, and the titles, when it's one particular manga title, here is Black Butler that you're seeing on the screen, and a couple others. You'll notice very consistent font, imagery, spine design, so it basically stacks up on the shelf on its side, and it's very clear the volume number and everything else that's there. It's easy to sort. Now, not only is this good for customers, the customers are able to come in and quickly tell what's going on, but it's also very good for the bookstore. And this is the part that a lot of people forget. That there's two parts to this. Yes, you do need to attract customers, absolutely, but you also need to make it easy for the bookstore to want to stock this stuff. Many of the people who are doing this job, working in this bookstore, they're making minimum wage or maybe a little bit more, but this isn't an amazing life where somebody's getting paid huge amounts of money. And so anything you can do to make their life better and easier is going to be extremely appreciated. They're going to keep the shelves stocked faster. They're going to make sure that the stuff is displayed more on end caps and other things. And this is going to be a help to them. So if we flip over and we look at the North American comic shelf, what you'll quickly notice is a gigantic cluster. So there's a lot more sizes. And it's kind of hard to see because they're all packed in there, but there's many different sizes in width, in height, in spine design, and it is all over the place. And even within particular companies, Marvel, for example, some of them have the nice Marvel logo at the top there, but many of them do not. Several of them just put it in random places. DC is sometimes at the bottom, Marvel's at the top. It's all over the place. And it's a mess. And if you just look at the shelf, it looks busier, it looks more chaotic, and it looks, frankly, as I talked to the person, I asked if the nice Barnes & Noble person would actually record something for me. They told me they were not allowed to. But the comment was, we've got boxes of North American content in the back. We don't supply it because it's not moving. The stuff isn't changing. And in many cases, if one particular thing sells out, if one comic sells out, then the shelves just kind of get reshuffled a little bit. They don't actually keep the stuff that's selling out well in stock. So the woman commented that they take the titles that they think are selling more based on kind of just observation. They don't really get much else. And they put those flat rather than vertical. So it becomes easier for them to pay attention to when something is going out of stock. Then they know to come in and kind of add to it. And the comment for the woman directly was, we kind of ignore this section. And you can tell just in the display. Now, what's interesting is, before, we don't have a bag on all things, North American. Walking Dead does a better job than most. So if you're looking at this screen, what you see is the fairly similar trade dress. They're using different colors, but notice the titles at the top, the numbers reasonably big at the bottom, and it's easy to tell what you're buying. This is one of the closest things to manga. This is better. And as a result, you're seeing, your Walking Dead was very successful in trades. The mystery is that The Walking Dead's been doing this for quite a long time, and more people are not adopting it. In many cases, there's no number at the bottom, or it's just, it's missing entirely. You look over at Batman, and it's like, it's a crazy amount of every single thing is done differently. Sometimes you've got a kind of little design at the top, other times the logo's at the top, sometimes it's at the bottom. You have things like, the Black Mirror, very good story. Just kind of, it's sitting out there. Where does this belong in continuity? Who knows? It's not built to sell multiple copies of Batman. That's the problem. It's insane.
I think by far the most controversial part of the topic was the sales. Nobody was denying that manga was outselling comics, but many people seem to be in denial that comics have been underperforming. I kept on seeing people say this was the best year for comics and how Marvel and DC have gotten more new readers than ever before. While I'm not super familiar with 2025's figures, I have been following the figures of some of the previous years, and I think there are a lot of things people aren't taking into consideration. First off, are those sales American comics only or graphic novels in general? Because if it's just going to be everything grouped together, then yeah, no duh sales are going to be up. That doesn't prove anything. Dark Horse sells comics and manga, and yet in spite of being an American company, manga has made up over half of their sales. Secondly, most of those sales for American comics are from issue 1s. Issue 1s sell well because collectors care about the variant covers. How well are the issue 2s selling? How well are the issue 3s selling? Afterwards, we usually see a dip in sales, so a good chunk of buyers don't even care about the actual story and are just looking for a collector's item. Ironheart and John Kent had great issue 1 sales, but they tanked afterwards and got cancelled. I also think inflation is a pretty big factor that nobody ever seems to bring up. Comics are more expensive now than they've ever been. So of course they're going to be making more money than their predecessors even if they're selling less units. I haven't done the math myself, but if we were to adjust for inflation, I'm willing to bet that comics from the 80s and 90s are still more popular than comics today. By the way guys, I just want to make something very clear. Just because something makes money doesn't mean it's good. That just means it's popular. And if it's popular, then there's usually a reason behind it. So please don't misinterpret this as, well, Absolute Batman didn't make as much money as X-Men, therefore it's bad. I'm just saying that X-Men resonated with readers more than what we're seeing with Absolute Batman, and there's probably a deeper reason as to why that is. Also, keep in mind guys that revenue doesn't always equal readership. How many returning readers are there? How long can new readers be expected to stay invested before losing interest like Ironheart? These were questions that nobody could give me an answer to. Also, keep in mind guys that inflation increases the cost of everything. So while they technically are making more money, the cost of production has gone up as well. So how much of their money are they actually getting back? I also love how people kept on bringing up Absolute Batman sales as if it were somehow a gotcha, even though I acknowledged it in my video. But wouldn't the success of Absolute Batman ultimately just prove my point? Also, are we really just gonna ignore Rob Liefeld? I mean, what the fuck does he know, right?
It's funny, I think that, I tend to be pretty optimistic, but in this one I'm worried. I'm straight worried.
Why?
Because stores are closing at a phenomenal rate. Independent comic sales are down. Mainstream comic sales are down, except for the top 3 or 5 books are up, and everything in the mid list is way down. Numbers that used to be numbers that would get you canceled are now like, no, that's a hit, you know. And independent books making back the cost of doing floppies is like names that should be able to do it no sweat are going into the red on singles and not coming out until the trades, and it worries me. And the other thing that worries me is, you know, we're heavily dominated by the superhero genre, and we're heavily dominated by DC and Marvel as the most successful shared universe comics. And I have nothing against DC and Marvel. I have worked for them both. I love them both. I love both universes. I think superheroes are great. So there is no part of me that's like, I had your first album. You know, it's like, great, I can love independent comics and I can love superhero comics. But I have a concern that while the industry, not quite as much as it used to be, it is is still heavily dominated by those two companies, and those two companies have gradually become part of larger behemoth corporations. And comics have always been special because of the way that they work in the brain and because of the way that we have always been cheap and fast and therefore innovative. So we could try things in comics because it's far less expensive to screw up in comics than it is.
Entire management suites of Hollywood studios get fired for taking the kind of chances we take every week in comics.
Yeah, you know, and that's how we continue to innovate, and that's why television and film come to us for material, is because we can take those risks because we're very inexpensive. And as we've become part of these larger behemoths, and they have started to see us in terms of brand management, I am worried that we are going to forget what we're for.
Lose innovation in favor of servicing brands. Yeah.
Yes, we're not going to be able to innovate the way that we have always been able to, and they're going to kill the golden goose.
I saw some people in my comments try to argue that you shouldn't compare manga to comics because manga have anime adaptations that are usually a direct one-to-one, whereas comics don't really have an equivalent to that. And while that might be true, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense as a defense. Like, doesn't that ultimately just prove manga is more easily accessible? The fact that you can usually just pick up the manga where the anime left off, whereas most adaptations of comics almost never do that. I also had a few goofy goobers in my comments try to say that adaptations are almost always more popular than the source material, as if that was something I was trying to dispute, which I wasn't. Hell, if anything, anime adaptations actually help drive the sales for the respective series the majority of the time. That doesn't really happen with comics. The MCU used to be an advertisement for the comics, but now the roles are reversed. Spider-Man is more popular now than he's ever been before, yet strangely enough, his comics just aren't selling like they should be. That's not a problem manga has to deal with. A lot of people seem to think that for whatever reason I was advocating for Marvel NTC to stop publishing these characters altogether, when that's not at all what I said. I never said I wanted the Superman IP to end. I just said that it might be time to consider retiring Clark Kent. If Peter Parker finally settled down with Mary Jane and Miles became the new Spider-Man moving forward, I would be totally fine with that. I think that's probably the best thing that could happen to him. Like, are you guys really okay with Peter being fated to be a cuck forever? Are you really okay with him constantly being diminished and humiliated? Basically just being a more pathetic version of Guts from Berserk? I don't know about you, but that just doesn't sit right with me. I don't know how anybody who calls themselves a Spider-Man fan can be okay with the character getting this kind of treatment. What we saw in Across the Spider-Verse is probably the closest thing he's ever going to get to a happy ending, and that's not even the same character. The closest thing we've ever seen to this in the comics has to be that one time in House of M, the story where he pretended to kill himself. Not only that, but he even had it taken away from him too. Marvel seems to think that relatability means failing at life, but they've basically just turned Peter into a cosmic tragedy. He's trapped to be perpetually unlucky, a status quo that feels less like a relatable struggle and more like a narrative abuse. Dragon is relatable. This is just sad. Look at SpongeBob. I love SpongeBob. I think the first 3 seasons are some of the best seasons of television from the early 2000s. And I even enjoyed a few season 4 episodes. Steven Hillenburg wanted the SpongeBob movie to be the end of the show, but because it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest show on television, Nickelodeon kept it going after Hillenburg left. His departure was the worst thing to ever happen to the franchise. The show used to have clever jokes, likable characters, and simple but fun and engaging storylines. Now the show is riddled with disgusting gag humor. The characters are annoying and obnoxious, shallow caricatures of their former selves, and the storylines genuinely feel like somebody just typed into ChatGPT, generate the best brain rot for an episode. SpongeBob is a show that's overstayed its welcome and needs to be retired. Just look at the difference between The Simpsons and King of the Hill. King of the Hill is remembered more fondly because the creators knew when to call it quits. King of the Hill ended with dignity. People can't fucking stand The Simpsons anymore. I used to watch it every night on TV with my parents. But now I can't even sit through a full episode past the movie they've gotten so bad. And as if they weren't already bad enough before, they've only gotten worse under Disney. Everybody wants The Simpsons to just go away. And I'm starting to see this happen to comics. People have become disenfranchised with the industry due to the push for quantity over quality. People want more stories like The Court of Owls. Nobody gives a fuck about I Am Not Starfire. And these publishers just can't seem to wrap their heads around that because they keep pushing for more comics like this. I absolutely adore Batman Hush. It's one of my all-time favorite comics. I fucking hate Hush 2. It's an embarrassment and a stain on the legacy of the first one, and I genuinely don't understand how anyone can enjoy this, let alone think that it's good. Batman stabs Barbara in the neck and injects her with the paralysis toxin. If this were any other character, I probably wouldn't care as much, but this is Barbara we're talking about. The same woman who was paralyzed for years and traumatized by the Joker. This genuinely made me angry, and it made me not like Batman anymore. One thing that I saw pretty frequently in my comments was, if you don't like it, don't read it, which I guess is fair if I weren't a fan. Like, if you don't like Spider-Man, then why are you reading Spider-Man? Can you really blame the restaurant if you order food you know you don't like? But I like Spider-Man, and I hate seeing him get abused by the editors and writers. I want to see Peter get the girl and live a happy life, but he's literally fated to suffer, and I don't see how anybody can be okay with that. I also saw some comments saying things along the lines of, nobody's begging you to read these comics and you aren't entitled to the lore if you don't put the work in. And these really annoy me because while they technically aren't wrong, they're still really weak arguments. It's basically just another way of saying shut up and go away, which only further alienates potential new fans and pushes them to support competitors instead. Like, imagine you're watching Game of Thrones and you turn to your friend and you ask them, what is the White Walker's motivation? And they just say,
nobody's begging you to watch this show.
Wouldn't that make them come off as a condescending prick and make you want to turn on Breaking Bad instead? Which brings me to my last point. I don't want to group all comic fans together. I apologize if it ever came across that way in this video. Most of them were pretty nice to me in my comments, and I do appreciate that. But some of them were just genuinely unpleasant people. They weren't just defending comics, they were gatekeeping pretty hard. And I'm not even entirely against gatekeeping. I'm all for defending your hobby, but at some point it just becomes blind fanboyism. This kind of behavior only pushes newcomers away and further hurts sales. But some comic fans are just too proud of themselves to realize that or admit it. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I wasn't planning on doing this video. I was supposed to do an entirely different video, but I just wanted to clear a few things up. I don't expect this video to blow up like the last one did. I honestly think I'm done with this topic for a while now. I'm still going to be making comic book related videos, but as far as the whole comics versus manga debate goes, I think I've said enough, and I'm honestly pretty tired of it. I'm tired of losers invading my comments and shilling for companies that could give less than a fuck about them. I'm going back to reading Exiles. So yeah, that's all. Catch y'all later.